afternoon, everyone. I am Jinky Perez.
And I'm Fatima Grace Enzola.
And we are going to tackle about forecasting. Let's define forecasting. Forecasting is a statement about the future value of a variable such as demand. Forecast is a basic input in the decision processes of operations management because they provide information on future demand. The primary goal of operations management is to match supply to demand. So, the importance of forecasting to operations management cannot be overstated. It plays an important role in the planning process because they enable managers to anticipate the future so they can plan accordingly. For instance, operations needs to know what capacity will be needed to make staffing and equipment decisions. Budgets must be prepared. Purchasing needs information for ordering from suppliers, and supply chain partners need to make their plans. There are two important aspects of forecasts. The first one is the expected level of demand, and the second one is the degree of accuracy that can be assigned to a forecast. The expected level of demand can be a function of some structural variation, such as a trend or seasonal variation, which we'll discuss as we go on. Forecast accuracy is a function of the ability of forecasters to correctly model demand, random variation, and sometimes unforeseen events. Forecast is made with reference to a specific time horizon, which may be fairly short or somewhat longer. Short-term forecasts pertain to ongoing operations. Forecasts affect decisions and activities throughout an organization in accounting, finance, human resources, marketing, and management information systems, as well as operations and other parts. For example, salespeople may be overly optimistic with their forecasts and may want to reserve capacity for their customers. This can result in excess costs for operations and inventory storage. Conversely, if demand exceeds forecasts, operations and the supply chain may not be able to meet demand, which would mean lost business and customers. There are two uses for forecasts. The first one is to help the managers plan the system, and the second one is to help them plan the use of the system. Planning the system generally involves long-range plans about the types of products and services to offer, what facilities and equipment to have, where to locate, and so on. Planning the use of the system refers to short-range and intermediate-range planning, which involve tasks such as planning, inventory, and workforce levels. Planning purchasing and production, budgeting, and scheduling. Forecasts are also used to predict other variables other than demand. Just keep in mind that the concepts and techniques apply equally well to the other variables. A wide variety of forecasting techniques are in use. They are quite different from each other.
However, certain features are common. So, what are their common features? First, forecasting techniques generally assume that the same underlying causal system that existed in the past will continue to exist in the future. As a manager, I have to update the software I'm using because unplanned occurrences can cause conflict with forecasts. For instance, the changes in features or prices of competing products or services can have a major impact on demand. Accordingly, I have to be alert and ready to override forecasts which assume a stable causal system. Next, forecasts are not perfect. Actual results usually differ from predicted values. The presence of randomness precludes a perfect forecast. Allowances should be made for forecast errors. Third, forecasts for the groups of items tend to be more accurate than forecasts for individual items. It's because forecasting errors among items in a group usually have a canceling effect. Opportunities for grouping may arise if parts or raw materials are used for multiple products or services is demanded by a number of independent sources. Lastly, forecast accuracy decreases as the time period covered by the forecast increases. Generally speaking, Short-range forecasts must contend with fewer uncertainties than longer-range forecasts, so they tend to be more accurate. Flexible business organizations require a shorter forecasting horizon and hence benefit from more accurate short-range forecasts than competitors who are less flexible and who must therefore use longer forecast horizons. After knowing these common features, let's proceed to the elements of a good forecast. A properly prepared forecast should fulfill certain requirements. These are the following. First, the forecast should be timely. Usually, a certain amount of time is needed to respond to the information contained in a forecast. For example, I am the manager of Jollibee. I would like to know the amount of inventory to be ordered for the next operation. When would be the forecast for the demand is timely? It is before the delivery of the inventory would take place. Next, the forecast should be accurate and the degree of accuracy should be stated. This will enable users to plan for possible errors and will provide a basis for comparing alternative forecasts. For example, being a manager of SM Supermarket, I should consider the lifespan of a product to determine the quantity of it to be placed in the market so that wastage could be avoided or somehow reduced. Next, the forecast should be reliable. Reliable in a way that it should work consistently. A technique that sometimes provides a good forecast and sometimes a poor one will leave users with know how many units will be needed, and schedulers need to know what machines and skills will be required. Next, the forecast should be expressed in meaningful units. The choice of units depends on user needs. Fifth, the forecast should be in writing. A written forecast will permit an objective basis for evaluating the forecast once actual results are in. For example, you have predicted the number of customers you will have in one day. You have to write it and you have to record the actual number of customers you have so you could compare it with your forecast. With that, you could have a more accurate forecast. Next, the forecasting technique should be simple to understand and use. Fairly simple forecasting techniques enjoy widespread popularity because users are more comfortable working with them. 7. The forecast should be cost-effective. The benefits should outweigh the cost. If the cost outweigh the benefits, rather not to take the action, especially if the degree of effectiveness is low.
And now, we should know the steps in the forecasting process. Here are the basic ones. The first one is to determine the purpose of the forecast. The question to be answered is, how will it be used and when will it is needed? This step will provide an indication of the level of detail required in the forecast, the amount of resources that can be justified, and the level of accuracy necessary. For example, the personnel and the computer time. The second one is to establish the time horizon. The forecast must indicate a time interval, keeping in mind that accuracy decreases as the time horizon increases. The third one is to select a forecasting technique. The fourth one is to obtain, clean, and analyze appropriate data. Obtaining the data can involve significant effort. Once obtained, the data may need to be cleaned to get rid of outliers and obviously incorrect data before analysis. The fifth one is to make the forecast. The sixth one is to monitor the forecast. A forecast has to be monitored to determine whether it is performing in a satisfactory manner. If it is not, re-examine and modify as needed and prepare a revised one. Accuracy and control of forecasts is a vital aspect of forecasting. So, forecasters want to minimize forecast errors. Error is the difference between the actual value and the value that was predicted for a given period. Therefore, error is equal to actual minus forecast. However, the complex nature of most real-world variables makes it almost impossible to correctly predict future values of those variables on a regular basis. Moreover, because random variation is always present, there will always be some residual error, even if all other factors have been accounted for. The positive errors result when the forecast is too low. The negative errors is when the forecast is too high. For example, if actual demand for a week is 100 units and forecast demand was 90 units only, the forecast was too low, the error is 100 less 90 equals 10. Forecast errors can influence decisions in two ways. The first one is in making a choice between various forecasting alternatives. And the second one is in evaluating the success or failure of a technique in use. Overly optimistic forecasts can be bad news. Overly optimistic forecasts by retail store buyers can easily lead retailers to overorder, resulting in bloated inventories. When that happens, there is pressure on stores to cut prices in order to move on the excess markdowns. Retail profits generally suffer. Furthermore, retailers will naturally cut back on new orders while they work off their inventories, creating a ripple effect that hits the entire supply chain, from shippers to producers and to suppliers of raw materials. The two general approach to forecasting is the qualitative and the quantitative. Qualitative methods consist mainly of subjective inputs, which often defy precise numerical description, while quantitative methods involve either the projections of historical data or the development of associative models that attempt to utilize causal or explanatory variables to make a forecast. The classifications of forecasting techniques includes judgmental forecasting, which forecasts that use subjective inputs such as opinions from customer surveys, sales staff, managers, executives, and experts. The second one is the time series forecasts, which forecasts that project patterns identified in recent time series observations. The time series is defined as the time-ordered sequence of observations taken at regular intervals. These techniques use historical data with the assumption that the future will be like the past. The third one is the associated model, forecasting technique that uses explanatory variables to predict future demand. For example, demand for paint might be related to variables such as the price per gallon and the amount spent on advertising, as well as to specific characteristics of the paint.
To know more about the classifications of forecasting techniques, here are the techniques based on judgment and opinions. First, executive opinions. Under this technique, a small group of upper-level managers may meet and collectively develop a forecast. This is often used as a part of long-range planning and new product development. The second one, the sales force opinions. Members of the sales staff or the customer service staff are often good sources of information because of their direct contact with consumers. There are, however, several drawbacks to using sales